Okay.
Okay.
Should I start? Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. Thank you everyone for having us. This is super nice to be talking about this research. It's so we've been working on this for a while on and off. Yeah, and this is actually our first real audience that we're presenting to about this. We did hold a workshop at the Artificial Life conference just a little bit before. But yeah, very happy to test out ideas. So please, any feedback, please, welcome. And yeah, you want me to use that? Yeah, then I have to leave that. Then do it. Yeah. Olaf is invisible. Oh. I have a superpower. Don't worry. It's
just have to go more of it.
Yeah, it's over here.
You know, I think it's so problematic to have this camera on the table.
If you're here, I think it's okay.
It's all right. Yeah. We're here. It's all right.
Yeah.
All right.
So we'll start with the introduction.
Yeah.
Just a bit about ourselves. So my name is Yuko Ishihara. I'm a philosopher. My background is in what is called phenomenology. That it's a philosophical movement started in the early 20th century. And also I work on Japanese philosophy, mostly the Kyoto school tradition. And yeah, well, the topic of play has been a kind of special topic for me. Recently, I've been working on philosophy of play and playfulness for some time. And my approach is comparative philosophy, so bringing in different philosophical traditions from different cultural backgrounds to understand the nature and significance of play for mostly human beings. But I've been wanting to extend this idea of play to more generally, play in living systems. And this is, I guess, our first attempt. Well, we've been working on it for some time, but as Olaf said, it's our first time to present it to an audience, so we're really happy to get any sort of feedback. And Olaf, you want to say a bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Olaf. I've been visiting here on and off. My background is in machine intelligence, I guess. AI kind of stuff, and mostly artificial life these days, which studies the living systems, not life as it is, but life as it could be, and I guess intelligence in systems as they could be. I'm the current president for the Society for Artificial Life, and yeah, I push this research also in Japan. We're both based in Kyoto, Japan. Yeah, good. Very excited about this.
So I'm going to talk first a bit about the kind of philosophical background, the general idea that we have, and then bit into the philosophy part, and then I'll hand it over to Olaf to talk a bit more of the of how this applies to complex systems, AI, and so on and so forth. So I'll just start with a general note about the topic of play in philosophy and the history of philosophy. The topic of play in itself is not a kind of mainstream topic in philosophy. Philosophers like to talk about serious matters, and play is not serious enough, I guess. So it has been marginalized, but that's not to say that important philosophers have said interesting stuff about it. So we've got the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who said life is a child at play, moving pieces in a game. So understanding life itself to be a child playing. Nietzsche, in the Three Metamorphoses, he talks about the transformation of the human spirit. And the third stage is, the first stage is the stage of the camel that, follows orders. And then says yes to all the orders and tradition, norms, and so on and so forth. And then the second stage is the stage of the lion, who says no to those traditions. And then we've got the third stage, which is symbolized by a child. So, and he says that he talks about how the highest stage of the human spirit is like a child playing. Not just kind of randomly playing, but creating its own play world, creating its own values, and that's understood to be the kind of the highest form of human life. Then we've got also interesting ideas from the Eastern philosophical traditions. In Zen Buddhism, there's this idea that when you become enlightened, all the activities that you engaged in, including work, including kind of tedious things like washing dishes, all of those activities become playful. And they have this word playful samadhi. Samadhi means a kind of concentrated mental state. Yuge-zanmai in Japanese. And so playfulness, again, in a similar way to Nietzsche, is a kind of achievement. It's a playful state is an achievement of the achievement of the mind. We have to kind of achieve that mental state. It's a higher kind of mental state that we have to kind of aim towards. And in the Zen tradition, that's when one becomes enlightened, then all the activities take on this kind of playful character. That was just to give you a background of what, there are interesting things to be said on play in the philosophical tradition. When we talk about play, so what is play? When we talk about play and playing, there's one aspect that I think all of us can kind of agree on unanimously, and that's this aspect of immersion. Like when you play something, when you're playing something that you like, any game, or when you're playing with your niece, or when I'm playing with my child, there's this aspect in which you engage, and you get absorbed in that game or the play activity. And this aspect has been noted by many philosophers. Bernard Suits is a philosopher. He's been working on the topic of play for some time. And in this famous book called The Grasshopper, Games, Life, and Utopia, he calls this the illusory attitude. The word, he uses the word ludens, coming from the Latin word ludens, that means to play, play. He says the illusory attitude is this acceptance of constitutive rules just so the activity made possible by such acceptance can occur. So it's, when we play, we kind of adopt these arbitrary rules. Why? Well, it's because we just, we kind of submit ourselves to those rules. There's a sense in which we let go of control and submit ourselves to those rules. And so this is called the illusory attitude. Now, what we want to say is that there's this other aspect in play which hasn't been focused on so much, which hasn't been emphasized so much. And this is the aspect of distancing. So immersion is the aspect of engaging. Bracketing, we call this bracketing. We use a term from the phenomenological tradition. Edmund Husserl, who's the founder of phenomenology, he took the word epoché, the ancient Greek word epoché, that means suspension of judgment, and he also called it bracketing. So what we do when we bracket is we put out of play our belief in the rules that govern our everyday practical lives. Usually, we're just kind of immersed in these rules. We don't really question them. We kind of, adopt them, and we just kind of go on, follow those rules. What we do when we bracket those rules is that we are distancing ourselves from those rules, creating a bit of freedom from those rules so that we can have a bit of a different kind of relationship to those rules. Bracketing, importantly, is not the same as negating. So when you say, okay, I'm going to bracket these rules, you're not going to deny or negate those rules, say that those are no good. You're just putting them aside temporarily. So our first proposal that we want to make is that play involves these two aspects, bracketing and immersion. So bracketing is kind of a negative procedure, negative in the sense that you're not doing anything positive. What you're doing is you're taking a distance to your belief. So you're kind of like, suspension of judgment is a very good word, I think, to capture that negative aspect. But you're kind of taking a distance to those beliefs. Immersion is this positive procedure of fully adopting these new set of rules and you become physically and mentally absorbed in the new virtual world. The thing is, when we play, we do these two things implicitly. The thing is, bracketing, or the procedure of kind of suspending judgment about the rules that we live in our everyday world. This is something that we do implicitly. So when a child plays, they also are implicitly bracketing the rules of our everyday practical lives and adopting these new sets of rules. They're not doing that explicitly, but we want to say that, well, even if it's not explicit, it's occurring, it's happening, it's taking place implicitly. The second proposal, which is related, is that, well, in play, it might be these two processes might be implicit, but what if we make them explicit? We want to say that this kind of playfulness as a meta attitude is where you explicitly bracket and explicitly immerse yourself in different rules. So it's an interplay of bracketing and immersion. There are two, this is related to the fact that there are two dangers when we play. One danger when we play is that we get too immersed, right? We get too involved in the play. When you're playing a video game, or this often happens in children, I guess. But they get so absorbed to the point that they forget that this is play, right? So the play rule becomes their sole rule. Why is that a problem? Well, it's kind of like addiction. How you kind of can't get out of it, right? So you're super immersed, you're super involved, and that's great. But I think the most detrimental aspect of this is that you no longer become playful, right? Because that is your old soul rule. That's the world that you live in. So it seems that in order to remain playful, some sort of distancing is necessary, which may not be super intuitive. That in order to remain playful, you need to distance yourself from that game or play. But some sort of healthy distancing is necessary, and we want to say that, well, bracketing kind of does that for us. So when you bracket the rules of the game, what you're doing is that you are, again, suspending judgment about those rules. And in doing so, you're no longer ruled by the game, right? So you're taking a healthy distance and you're saying, okay, these are the rules of the game. That's great, but you kind of have a distance to them. You can kind of reflect on those rules and say that there's a sense in which you're kind of making those rules, relativizing those rules and saying, okay, those rules are the rules of that game, but I'm not going to be ruled by that game by taking this distance. So bracketing ensures that we don't get too attached to the game. On the other hand, there's the other danger in play, which is that you become too detached. Again, this may not be too intuitive, but when you become too detached from the game, then you might be able to, when you take a distance, what this allows you to do is that it allows you to kind of have a bit more reflective point of view perspective, right? So you may be able to provide some sort of reflective insight into the game that you may not have been able to if you were simply immersed in the game. But if you're merely detached, right? If you're solely detached, then there's a danger that you risk becoming a kind of detached spectator. So sport analysts, they might be able to say great things about the game, but they're not players themselves, right? So getting in the game, becoming immersed as an engaged player is necessary to be truly playful. So this is one of the main points that we want to make, is that this playful meta attitude consists of the ability to freely go in and go out of a local virtual world. It's this dynamic interplay of going in and going out. Going in is this dimension of immersion. Going out is this aspect of bracketing. And it's this dynamic interplay of immersion and bracketing, of going in and going out, that allows for us to sustain this playfulness. And when this stagnates, the agent either gets stuck in the game and no longer becomes playful, which is the loss of bracketing, or you get out of the game, forget the real fun of playing, which is to really get immersed. So this is the kind of diagram that we have. This ability to go in and out is what characterizes this playful meta attitude. And these could be the local virtual rules. And Olaf would add on to this and apply this idea to AI and other areas. But that's the kind of general idea that we have. Right. So what I'll do in the following is I'll say a bit more of the kind of philosophical grounding to this idea. So this idea that play is characterized by this dynamic movement is something that we find in Gadamer's thought. Gadamer's his magnum opus is from 1960, The Truth and Method. In it, he has this analysis of play, which is quite interesting. And he starts off in his analysis saying that he wants to, but he's basically criticizing the notion of play that's been featured in the history of philosophy up to then. Kant famously spoke of the free play of faculties of imagination and understanding in aesthetic judgment. So he talks about this play, but it has to do with, details don't matter, but it has to do with the faculty of the mind, right? Play is something that is happening in the mind. Friedrich Schiller also spoke of how he spoke of this notion of play drive. So when we encounter beauty, when we're in the face of a beautiful object, he says that there's this kind of different new drive that's awakened called the play drive, that's different from the sense drive, sensibility and form drive, that kind of balances out our senses and the and understanding. But Gadamer criticizes these previous notions, saying that all these Western philosophers have kind of had a subjective take on play. For them, play has had to do with something in the mind, right? It's something that is happening in here, not so much out there. And it's always been talked about in the field of aesthetics, not always, but it's a kind of typical, play has been a main topic in aesthetics, and he calls it the subjectivization of aesthetics, and he criticizes this. And he says, in Truth and Method, I wish to free this concept of the subjective meaning that it has in Kant and Schiller, and that dominates the whole of modern aesthetics and philosophy of man. So he wants to take a distance to these subjective interpretations of play, and instead he starts with the way the word play is used metaphorically, right? So he looks at the words like play of light, play of the waves, play of words even, and he says, okay, when we look at these metaphorical usages, actually what it reveals is the original meaning of the word, because what metaphors do is that they kind of already do the abstraction for you, right? So he thinks that metaphors are a great way to get at the original meaning of the word, and from the use that he sees here, the original meaning that he extracts is this to and fro movement that's not tied to any goal that would bring it to an end. So for him, play is essentially characterized by this movement, back and forth movement, right? And there's no specific rule that, there's no specific goal that is going to bring this movement to an end. So it's not going anywhere specifically, but the nature of play is just in this dynamic movement. So play is the currents of the movement as such, he says. And what Gadamer does is in the Truth and Method, he goes on to apply this definition of play as this movement to our understanding of art and to our to human understanding in general, the structure of our understanding. So I'm seeing a hand here.
Guys, the slides are stuck on the third one. We don't see the slides here.
green button, resume share.
Yeah, but
I think you have to exit first and then click on it.
Why? But it stops the share when you exit, so that's yeah.
Oh wow, that's super interesting.
So just try to
Oh wow. So
but try to launch the title and then click on the zoom bar.
yeah, but the zoom bar is unclickable once you go once you go full screen. It's amazing. That never happened.
technology loves us.
All right. Yeah.
So maybe
Can I
not
exit?
with the screen, just we like it.
Kind
Next
of like
slide here.
like a
Yeah.
keystroke. Shortcuts like right arrow, for example.
Oh yeah, that yeah.
No, but it's pause.
Yeah, I was hoping that we can get
Just not do full screen.
Oh, I'm here.
But
Okay.
it's
No, I'm here. I see my cursor. All right.
You are invisible man.
I am. I know, right?
but it doesn't.
Yeah. I'm here. I'm almost there. All right. Resume share.
No,
All right.
but it doesn't click.
It doesn't click. Amazing. It's so interesting. You know what? And now we cannot exit.
Otherwise, you don't put in the screen.
Alright.
You have to unclick the
Actually, I
click,
can
yeah?
stop sharing. Yeah, yeah, I know. Sorry, I'm taking over your computer, but it's very bad.
Does it?
Okay, I stopped sharing.
You just hide this one and this one. And
Okay,
you
restart.
yeah.
I just in case that would work. I have doubts, but
No, you're sure this okay.
is that alright? That works. Is that
Yeah. Do you see now?
the right slide?
Do you see slides changing on Zoom?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Good. For what?
With the next 5 minutes.
Okay, so yeah, Gadamer extracts this original meaning of play, and then he goes on to apply this this definition of play as a movement, to and fro movement, to understanding in general. First, understanding artworks, that's his kind of starting point. So he starts off by saying that, well, what does it mean to understand an artwork? The meaning of an artwork. He starts off by saying that an artwork is not an object to be appreciated by a disinterested kind of subject. That's a very Kantian way of understanding our relationship to art. Rather, he says the meaning of an artwork takes place in the back and forth interplay of the spectator and the artwork. Okay. So just as the players lose themselves in play and playing seriously, the spectator, the audience, must participate and submit themselves to this interpretive process. So we're not just, when we see art, look at art, we're not just kind of spectators waiting for the meaning of the artwork to kind of reveal itself to us. That's a very static way of understanding the structure of understanding artworks. Gadamer wants to say, no, when we understand artworks, it's much more dynamic, right? So it's an interpretation process, which is this kind of a meaning is revealed to us, and then we kind of we attempt to see if this meaning accords with. This is not just artworks for him. He goes on to talk about how we understand text in general. We see, and also dialogue with other people. We see if our understanding is correct, and then we see what the artwork tells us again, or the other person speaks. We hear, and then we listen, and then we attempt to talk. So it's this kind of dynamic movement that takes place in between the spectator and the artwork. Now, what Gadamer really emphasizes in his notion of play is the play's immersive aspect, right? So he talks about how understanding involves, again, understanding not just artworks, but understanding in general, involves engaged participation in something larger than ourselves. He talks about how we have to kind of submit ourselves to whatever is being offered to us. Then this involves us to become engaged. And he calls this the primacy of play over the consciousness of the player. It's not as if we can kind of rule the game, or we have the kind of idea in here that somehow can correspond to something that's out there. Rather, again, understanding is something that's dynamic. It happens in between the spectator and the object. And his emphasis on engaged participation and immersion has to do with the fact that he's trying to identify the unique method for the human sciences as opposed to the modern sciences. In the modern sciences, in the modern scientific kind of method, the paradigm kind of attitude is that of a detached observer, right? You're not supposed to bring in your kind of subjective ideas into play. So you're a detached observer. It's a very kind of third-person point of view that you're taking, and he wants to oppose this to the kind of method that is necessary, that is required in the human sciences, which is one of an engaged player. So this is why he emphasizes this engagement and immersion in play. But in emphasizing play's immersive character, which is really the kind of seriousness of play, right? When you play, you're very serious, you're committed. In doing so, Gadamer underemphasizes this other aspect of play that's equally important, which is this aspect of distancing or bracketing. And I'm seeing in chat, should I look at it or do I have to go out?
It was before.
Oh, it was okay.
Yeah, it was before.
All right, so going on, Paul Ricoeur, who follows Gadamer's footsteps. I didn't mention, but Gadamer is he's a hermeneutic phenomenologist. He works out what's called hermeneutic phenomenology. So he's a phenomenologist, but his focus is more on kind of human understanding. Ricoeur is also a hermeneutic philosopher, and he also develops analysis of play, and he expands on Gadamer's analysis of play and discusses the play process of understanding that takes place not so much in art, but he focuses on writing and reading, especially fiction. And when we immerse ourselves in a kind of imaginary world that fiction opens up, what happens is we adopt this new meaning horizon that has been opened up in the imaginary world, and he calls this appropriation. But unlike Gadamer, who just focused on this kind of engagement, Ricoeur takes note of this other aspect that the fact that what enables us to get immersed in this kind of imaginary world is that we kind of leave behind this other world that we were living in. And he calls this distanciation. So this kind of appropriation is possible because of the distanciation from our meaning horizons of our everyday world. And it's interesting that what we're distancing from, for Ricoeur, he talks about distancing ourselves from the actual world, everyday world, but also in doing so, we're also distancing ourselves from our own identity, who we are, from our egos. So he calls this a letting go or relinquishment of the subject. So what we do, what happens when we kind of, it's like kind of taking on and off clothes. Like the ego is like taking off on and off clothes, right? Our identity. So usually we're living in this world. We have a set of clothes on that we're very comfortable with. When we engage in fiction, what we're doing is that we're actually taking off these old clothes temporarily. We're not going to burn them. We're going to take them off, put them aside, and then we're going to put on different ones. Distanciation is the taking off, process of taking off. Appropriation is putting new ones on. I think this is the last slide I have on my side. This emphasis on bracketing that Ricoeur kind of takes up is actually widely recognized in the Eastern philosophical traditions and Buddhism specifically. They don't call it bracketing. They call it, negation of the ego or letting go. In Zen Buddhism, this is something that I mentioned at the very beginning. This idea of playful samadhi, right, is this kind of ideal state when one becomes enlightened, then you enter the state of playful samadhi, is where all our activities, including work, become playful. And they say this is achieved only by letting go of your ego, right? By letting go of the kind of craving, all the kind of desires that you have, this ego that is holding on to that is telling you do this, do that, I want this, I want that. By letting go of that, then you kind of become more acceptance, I guess, open to things that come. And in doing so, everything kind of becomes playful. It's kind of fun. Everything is fun. So it's not to say that they're not taking things seriously. It's just that they have this ability. I would say that the people who are enlightened in the Zen Buddhist tradition are those people who have this ability to go in and go out, to immerse and then to bracket. This ability, it's a kind of freedom to be able to do that. And they have this kind of higher sense of freedom that allows them to do that. So all kind of activities, all doing becomes a kind of effortless doing. They're doing it, they're engaged in it, but it's kind of effortless because it's kind of, there's no kind of strong center that's making them do this and that and holding on to specific things, creating a boundary that in a sense disallows them to do other things. They're much more freer to kind of go into different things, not only go in but go out and go in and go out. So I would say that in the Zen Buddhist state, the higher order state that they're talking about is this kind of the playful meta attitude exemplified to its highest. And then I'm going to hand it over to Olaf, I think. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I think here I kept my part a bit shorter, so which is good because we have less time to explain. So we still get to have discussion just to make sure. We're not in a we still have time for discussion, right?
Awesome.
Okay. So I think the first remark is here is that it might. So we're talking about this bracketing things that allows you to enter a game. So if you play, say, a sort of a game of chess or Go, right? You become the game. I know how many people play chess or something like it, right? Don't you feel like you are the pieces, right? You are the black and white stones in Go, right? You're not really yourself, aren't you? When you play, you are really immersed, like you said, right? And you shave off somehow your personality as well by doing that. Now it's easier said than done. Those are phenomenological descriptions of this kind of subjective experience of playing, and yet this is not the mathematical description per se. So there is a way that we can define those, including a characterization of the agent when you play, right? So you have the agent that is engaged in its normal, natural context, and then it engages in this immersed situation. And wouldn't it be nice to know what that is exactly if you have the characterization of that? And wouldn't it be nice to have the mathematical transformation? Looks like a sort of change variables that gets you into this immersed game. These are different words that say exactly what I'm saying here. And that should bring in the behavior, the causal structure, the goals, difficult stuff, the beliefs of the system into this new internal causal spatial temporal structure of the game instead of the larger game that we play every day. And I guess there is this sort of opposition in general between, and you're probably familiar that with practices that you have, and I don't know, your practices and I think it's translatable in AI as well. between having a strong purpose and drive, right? I want to do stuff. I want to do science. I want to organize amazing events. I'm really into like I have goals. I have stuff to do, and it's I have important shit to do, and I have to get it done. This is super important, right? We need that. On the other hand, if you do meditation, or if you're engaged in different practices, what you're being taught is that you have to learn to let go, to accept, to be open-minded. And those seem very opposite, right? And yet, those are two things that you're pushed towards from different traditions. And this is the same trade-off, I'd argue, that leads you towards exploitation or exploration. And that's something that we find in reinforcement learning or different machine learning paradigms. And they're profoundly somehow opposite, but maybe they don't have to be. And that's what we are starting to find, is that maybe there is a correct sort of balance, like a dance. That's what we say in our paper. So I shaved off a bunch of things we say. But this is the core of that, is that by dancing in the right rhythm between them, you can actually, you don't have to choose, and you shouldn't have to choose between them to organize the most valuable paths, new or old, into your future. And some of that is akin to things I shared that off from the presentation to evolutionary patterns of evolvability and so on, second order dynamics in evolution. I'm giving this as an example here. Maybe you've heard of open-ended learning, maybe open-ended evolution kind of research, and I think that's kind of helpful as a picture to go into this. This is an example by some effort by Joel Lehman, Ken Stanley, and others that have those simulations. What I really like in those sets of simulations, it's not just this paper, right? It's now a body of work into open-endedness, in which they explore the co-evolution of the agent choices, right, decisions that it makes, combined with the environment, and not considering that the environment is fixed and that the agent is evolving into it, although that's a very helpful position to have, right? It's a nice model. But once you consider the environment, in a very inactive way, I think many of you are familiar with that, is an active learner as well. You can evolve the environment at the same time as you evolve the intelligence agent. And that gives you a more explorative way to explore solutions that are not only, it's not only evolving your chess player, right? So I'm not evolving only agents that play chess better. I'm also evolving agents that play different versions of chess, right? Because I'm evolving games as well, the set of rules we're in. And in return, I have much more creative players of chess, even when you come back to the original game. That makes sense. That's the general picture. I really liked I think it's in the last 6-7 years, I've been hearing Randy Beer, amazing researcher at Indiana University, say things about mostly the game of life, because he studies that as a toy model, which is amazing because you have emergence of patterns. I have to give a summary about that. What is really interesting, and what he says usually at the end of his presentations these days, is he talks about switching perspectives, and it's very close, I think, to what we're touching on. So if you have the simulation you work on, right, like this sort of game of life, you can step out of the game of life as us, we are as researchers, and look at the game of life, and you're God, right? You can change the rules and you run it, and then you look at the game of life. Oh yeah, there are those patterns. We play physics, yeah, and we look at it from external observer point of view. Or what you could do, you could consider what observers inside the game of life are capable of characterizing about the agency of those gliders. Right? And you can say, what can a glider tell about another glider? Or a complex glider, right, that can make extremely precise models. And the third perspective, which is not only being in the game of life, but being the agents you're studying and studying yourself. And I think that comes with a different set of constraints. I give those as examples of jumping into different levels of play as levels of not only stimulating, but perspectives on a set of dynamics. I'll give another example that we gave in another paper we wrote. I'm seeing, yeah, that's a chapter from last year. Jumping between levels of organization. You could view that almost as coarse graining. Doesn't have to be, but maybe without the details here, there are ways that you could literally change variables, right? And do operate this change of variables to jump into the game. Maybe there is a characterizable transformation that gets you into a chess piece or a set of chess pieces, then dynamics within that game. And and if you manage to characterize this change, maybe you understand better how to get in and get out. I'll say something about that in a second. Another example we give is, I know how many of you are computer science majors or minors, have a background. All right, not so many of us. This okay, it's important. This is a model of the internet. Doesn't look like it, but this is the internet. I think it's my favorite picture of the internet. You often are shown as this big network. I think this is much more truthful to what it is. It's layers of stuff stacked over each other. At the bottom, you have electrical signals, right? Well, you should have electrons and everything below. But well, you know, and turtles all the way down. But even if you start at the physical layer of electrical signals, you build a code with those signals, which is 1 or 0s being passed over that. You have a protocol, a convention that allows you to pass messages. And on top of that, you'll have another layer that uses those 1 and 0s. You don't have to use those anymore. You can build in error correction, whatever mechanisms you want within those languages, and build layers over layers of those protocols that become more and more complex. All right, enough of computer science. I'm teaching enough of that during the year. What is interesting is that there is an encapsulation of those messages, and every message goes all the way down, and ultimately is using the protocols all the way down. A bit like to send you guys messages during this talk. I'm using myself all the way down, but I don't feel like I am. So something that we've heard before, it's like there's this coarse grain, different levels of descriptions of reality. So we have like all the physics and maybe the cells that are fairly complex, swarms of cells, tissues and so on, up to our cognition. And there must be a translation of some kind of meaning passed between those layers. And it involves a sort of change of variables. I removed the details of that. So we'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow if you're there for the workshop, about translations between different organisms. But I think this is the core of it. Is there a nice, neat transformation we can use to translate? There is a getting in and getting out in the metaphors I give you today. And I think I want to focus on that, and we'll conclude after this set of remarks. You can get in chess, right? And yet you get out and play your life, right? You can play chess for different reasons. It can be finding it naturally pleasurable. It's just so exciting. Maybe you don't really explain why you enjoy chess. When you play chess, you may also not be playing chess. Maybe you give challenges to yourselves. I control the center, right? Or I just play the French. And this is a constraint. I don't have to play always French. I don't have to develop this and that. But there's play into play, right? And it's this bubble within the bubble. Getting in is somehow easy to picture for us, right? So you give yourself constraints, you shave off parts of the reality, and you play that. Getting out, something that we talk a lot in Go players is that it changes your life. It's like a martial arts, a real practice. You get into it, but when you get out, things in your life have changed. How do we extract the meaning of that? It seems almost magical. I'm sure we do it, but making sense out of it, I would argue, is more difficult. I want to hear what you have to say about this. it's harder to translate this meaning back into reality than making use of it within the realm of this video game you're playing. And there must be something very different in the direction into it and the direction out of it, the way down in my diagram before and the way back up. It's also not jumping into a game and out, right? It's jumping from a game to another game. We just talked about category theory. Maybe there's a use to jumping into algebra, then geometry, then this other field, and then back. It must be maybe a best trajectory for certain uses. And maybe there is one that is more natural to what we're trying to achieve. And yeah, I would like us to think also about that. Would you like to sum up maybe that's so let's repeat a few things we have said before we discuss them.
Yeah, so the main proposal is that playfulness involves this dynamic movement of going in and going out. When people talk about play, typically they focus on this immersive aspect, but we want to say that this aspect of going out, movement of going out, bracketing, is equally important, if not more important. So Gadamer's definition of play as a dynamic to and fro movement is something that's reminiscent to what we're saying, but again, he emphasizes this immersive aspect. Paul Ricoeur and Buddhism, specifically Buddhism and the Eastern traditions, they highlight more of this aspect of bracketing, of distancing. And importantly so, I think, because as Olaf was saying towards the end, this movement of going out seems to be in some sense more challenging. When we go, once we're in a game, once we're playing, it's fun and we want to stay there. But again, when we just stay in one game, one world, that becomes your sole world, and there are some consequences to that. The most detrimental one perhaps being that you become less playful because you're just working with one set of rules. But it becomes rigid. There's no free space. So this aspect of going out is very important, and that's something that Buddhism specifically highlights. This back and forth movement resonates with the study of system dynamics, like I was saying, specifically exploitation dynamics. And yeah, bracketing is potentially more challenging because it requires this kind of grounding of external values into a new meaning space. So you've acquired some new meaning, but now the task is for you to bring it back into that other meaning space, potentially the one that you inhabit. I wouldn't say it has more meaning, but it's just the kind of meaning space that is home, your home meaning space, I guess. So it's important for you to bring it back home, I guess. Maybe that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah, I guess we'll stop there, and we're really excited to hear any kind of feedback from you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Now for the discussion, I suppose we need to switch
Sure,
the
yeah.
mics here, yes?
You have to escape. Yeah.
Yes, I think there is important maybe a distinction to make. I think maybe in and out of a game is a relatively easy thing to do. I mean, any human being can play a chess and then go back to realities and play a game of cards. There is nothing really difficult there. Whereas doing something like watching, being aware of the rules and thinking about alternative rules and so on, I think it's a much higher cognitive process, and I think it's important to not conflate the two. It's not because you can go from one game to another that you understand how the rules are made. And yeah, so it's just a distinction you might find useful.
Right, yeah. Becoming aware of the kind of norms and the rules and understanding their role in that game. Yeah, that requires in itself, I think, the distancing. But yeah, you're right, that distancing in itself doesn't give you that. It's a kind of But distancing gives you that kind of reflective space that allows you to do that.
Yeah, I think you said it in the recurrent part, but I haven't. So it's going to be the point that I sort of ellipse that engagement. And it's not only just playing. So playing, switching is sort of easy, but once you're engaged, you might be addicted also, or other sort of fluffy things. I like those the perceptual crossing experiment. It's called when you engage in this simulation, stripped away from all those of the things that we find usually, right? And it's very abstract. But you learn the language of that abstraction. A bit like in chess, you become chess, right? And that's have you experienced that? You come back and then you see everything in sort of chess ways. It's still back. You see the patterns, right? And that's what I'm talking about. So when you re-engage, the switch back is you still see things, but you don't make sense of them. So this is the making sense, right? This is why we should be more precise in what we say there. It's not just the switching the activities being dropped in there, but somehow the sensible, meaningful re-engagement in the other environment. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yes, well, first I want to congratulate you for a very clear explanation of, I think, very interesting and very important ideas. So about a year ago, I was myself thinking deeply about play because we might then have a postdoc, Federico, who was going to submit a project about play, specifically about one character and his play to the FAO. And I kind of gave a similar idea, but what there is another idea that I think that characterizes play that you haven't touched, and that is the fact that if we look evolutionarily, all the mammals and all these birds play. So it is something that has evolutionarily, it has a function. And when you see that mammals play, for example, you see little dogs play, they play, fight, and there is similarity and difference between a play fight and a real fight. The similarity is that they make similar kind of movements. The difference is, of course, that they don't really bite each other, they don't really hurt each other. So in this case, you might say that play fight is a kind of a representation of the real fight. So they are playing in a worlds. It's kind of like a real fight, but without the dangers of the real worlds. So they can learn how to be in case they look at into a real fight. And I think that in human play, originally you have the same thing, but because the games develop more and more specifically, like the chess game, originally the chess game may have been a way of strategically thinking about combats. But in the end, it became so highly specialized and so formalized that we can no longer say that chess is a representation of strategic warfare. So I think that there is still an important aspect of play, that the most useful play should have some kind of a relation with the real world, and by exploring the play worlds, you become better at dealing with the real world later. And that's what children typically do. Children will make tree houses, and of course, in the real world, they will never have to build a tree house, but they may have to build a real house, or they may have to build a shelter, or they may have to climb in a tree. So by building a tree house, they are learning about the real world. So I wonder how you use this aspect of the representation. I call it representation. Representation is a little bit a strong word. It's not a representation in the sense of cognitive science. It's more that there is a relation between the real world and the real world.
Yeah. Early on, we thought of remember we thought of the mere isolation from the environment, so of patterns. So just like you say, the cubs are playing in the animal book. I thought it was insufficient as a paradigm. Maybe I wanted to capture more, but it's hard to capture more without. It's actually hard to capture just cub play. We easily capture any kind of representation in the in nature. So the paradigm you isolate this bubble, and chess is in a way doesn't have to be about winning wars or being good at life, right? You can play chess for chess. And that's being really playful is being really isolated. Why we play, not being trying to play chess to improve my cognitive ability, right? It's just I'm playing chess, right? And for the God literature, everything we read, I think animal studies, they always immediately relate this to usefulness in survival and selectiveness. I feel like a bit like Terry Deacon and others that isolation and shielding within a neutral space of evolutionary patterns has a usefulness. And I think this is it, right? So this shielding in Terry Deacon or others has its own use because you can explore more freely, and but it's a different use than directly. So that's why that clashes with the representationalism, or not that representationality, to oppose it to. I'm not touching to I'm not working against enactivism here. This doesn't have to be directly used. Again, does that reflect what we wrote?
So I think that people underestimate indirect usefulness. If you play chess, you are actually training your brain. You are thinking. You are teaching yourself to concentrate, to remember, to look ahead. So when we are playing, we are in a sense exercising our capabilities. We're not exercising them in the representational way, in the sense that each chess piece would represent a particular piece of reality. It's obviously not that. But the chess game as a whole is a kind of a virtual model of cognitive exploration of some complicated space of interactions, and by doing it, you get better at that.
There is something though, there is for some reason some very strong need to defend play from this kind of utilitarian thinking, but it has to be useful. Like that everything in the end comes down to like evolution and being better at surviving, and basically seeing the world like either I'm gonna out-survive you, or you're gonna out-survive me. In the end, there has to be something beyond just getting better at something. Like there is something very important to get at about why we should defend playing from this kind of utilitarianness, right? Like in the end, surviving, getting better at things isn't enough. Like you have to actually enjoy it, right? You actually have to have like a playful attitude to life to enjoy it. And so yeah, exactly. But there's a danger in like reducing everything to evolutionary advantage.
I would add to what you said that enjoyment itself is also another way to tie it to something in the external environment. So maybe you don't even need the enjoyment kind of, what is it, observational judgment. It's not, maybe without it. You get more deeply into play.
I'm not being normative, I'm not saying you should play in order to be useful, but the fact that all animals play can only be explained by there was an evolutionary advantage, unless you want to assume a creator who has decided that animals should play and therefore they play. The only explanation for something that is so common throughout the living world must be that it has an evolutionary advantage, and to me it's obvious which one it is.
I think, maybe we digress. Maybe this is more like a conversation for the bar, but I feel like, but then what is evolution, right? Evolution is an infinite game.
Yes.
So it's somehow like we come back full circle, right?
Yeah. Everything is a conversation for a bar.
Yeah.
So
This is a good discussion, but it can go on for a long time. Some of the points that I wanted to raise have been touched actually already, but I'm just going to make my remarks and the first, I wanted to ask you indeed, do you think that animals play? I'm not making any judgment as to why they would play if they play, but do you believe that animals play? I just add that I don't believe that everything that animals do, even on a large scale, necessarily is only and strictly evolutionary. If you see a bird playing with snow on the roof of a house, there is no clear evolutionary advantage whatsoever, while it is clear that the animal enjoys itself, whatever that may mean. So, but how does this fit? And why do I ask this? Because of the very interesting, by the way, cycle of popping in and popping out. What does this mean in the context of, say, animal play or of play of individuals or entities which are not supposedly have already an established self-consciousness? And this raises another question, because I heard you speak about enactivism. I don't want to enter that domain either, but the point is, what I miss in this discussion totally is the relation between the mind and the body, which is of course crucial with respect to play. I do not mean that there are no games that are, let's say, not purely mental, because even for chess you need your body to play, but the big thing about chess, of course, is a mental process. But many plays or games are not. They are at first embodied and then have some kind of psychological or cognitive or conscious counterpart. Martial arts is a very good example, by the way. It is also interesting to see that in ancient times, and that will be my last remark, that play in cultural sense in human societies, where the opting in and opting out, distanciation and not distanciation thing, was always taking place in a separate space, often a sacred space. In the ancient world, in Europe, it would be called the theatrum. And you see that even until medieval times, martial arts is belonging to the group of artes theatricae. So even when they are deadly, they are seen as kind of plays that are played out in a sacred space. And I think all these elements and these levels and these ramifications lack a little bit too much in this contribution, which I, by the way, found extremely interesting in religions.
Yeah, the animals play. I think they do, but I think yeah, one thing I guess I kind of want to challenge, kind of following up on Francis' point, was thinking of this kind of physical world with all the meanings that we and values that we have, taking this to be the world, kind of the kind of home world, and then when I think this is maybe something that we might.
Yeah, it should work.
Like,
Yeah.
this is the world we live in. And all the play worlds happen inside. And I think you think it this way. And I'm a bit, there's something uneasy about this picture for me, because we can't take a distance from this one. I think in the Zen tradition, when they talk about this playful samadhi, they're talking about taking distance to this world as well. This is no different from all the other worlds. This is the play world itself. And that's phenomenologically, subjectively speaking, to be able to live in that way is very difficult because everything happens in here that's important for us. That's quite different from these play worlds that's protected in a sense and isolated. But yeah, I think I want to say that there is the possibility for us to take a distance to this world. And I guess bringing it back to your point about animals, I guess there are two things. One is that maybe animals, well, I don't know. Maybe animals have a strong sense of this one world that is very important for survival. And then the play world happens in here. Another way of thinking of it is that animals don't have a very strong sense of this world as being the world. I think there are two ways of thinking about it. I'm not sure which one is necessarily right, but if you think of it the second way, then yeah, everything is kind of played for them, and there's not necessarily, it's all kind of spectrum. For us human beings, so this has huge kind of importance, and it also has to do with the fact that we have self-consciousness and a very strong sense of ego that's attached to this world.
I think the spectrum point of view is that I think enlightening in here, right? So it doesn't have to be in and out, and some of what you said, Francis, right? Or others too. It might have some of the representations of reality, of course, when you play it. Some of it can be purposefully or not a model of the external world, and that's all good or bad. But it has the consequences that you actually have. You are actually playing something in relation with the world. If you take a very extreme stance on this, something like Don Hoffman and others about reality being an illusion, right? Even Anil said, you might be playing a game. We are all playing a game that is actually not reality, right? And it's very far from it. It's just we're all playing our experiences, this game. And it's in inter-subjective game because we're playing science here, so it's not only my subjectivity, not yours, but ours, and we construct it together. And yet, we are so far from Hoffman's point of view from the real technical bottom ground.
I just would like to add that being aware of play and games and rules is not trivial even for humans. I think before age 6 or so, it's all one game of interactions and rules, and it takes at least, I don't know, age 4, 5, 6 before you, and that's why it can be also extremely intense for young children to play a too violent game or something, because they will be totally immersed.
It's such an interesting point because you also acquire things like modeling others, and you lose it and you reacquire it. It's so interesting in development. A good example in Belgium, where you switch languages, so you're conscious of different games that you're playing. You're switching cultures when you are in the presence of other different people, different ages, right? So actually, this intervenes pretty early, but you're right, it's not right away, and it's.
I think it's much earlier than this. I think children know the difference between play and not play at least by the age of 2.
But
there's quite some research about it. Play is something very instinctive, very simple, very primitive.
But then I want again to put the thing on the table, the relation between the mind and the body in this context, especially when we talk about the children. We can safely assume that whether it's at 2 or at 5, I don't care, but that they do not yet have this consciousness apparatus that more adult or more grown-ups are, and this was not yet addressed. So I would be curious how you look on this.
What about it that way? Speaking of this kind of going in and out at this level, where we're able to kind of bracket this world that we live in, that requires a very high level of awareness, consciousness, in the sense of one that requires kind of discipline and practice, right? To kind of it requires a lot of practice to be able to distance yourself from that, which is related to the sense of self. I wanted to say, what I wanted to mention is that in the different play rules, you're requiring different notions of self, right? You can be this self, is that self. It talks about when you play chess, you become the chess pieces. You acquire different senses of self, and we also have a sense of self, an identity, one that we like to wear very closely to ourselves, which is linked to connected to our name, right? And this identity, we think that we cannot really get rid of. The Buddhists would say, well, the sense of non-self, no self, that the Buddhists talk about, I think, is this idea that the ultimate I, am none of that. I am not this, I'm not that, I'm none of this. I'm not even this Yuko. I am none of that because I am the one that plays all of that. I'm just playing all of that. The real self is the one that plays all of that. and you can't really identify yourself as any of them, right? You're just the player. So it's this higher sense of self as a player that is, I think, what is essentially no self.
But that would imply that play is only accessible to entities with high levels of.
Well, I mean, distance, like.
Yeah, so I agree. So I was going to.
I suspect that in the sense, the highest level of consciousness is the same as the lowest sense of consciousness, but that there is this in between sense where we are putting categories and we have identities or names. That is the problem.
I think you're right. So you could consider going down, going up. If anything, the kid has it very early on, and it loses this freedom of malleability of cognition because of the developmental constraints. And then it's hard for us now to reconstruct a different reality in which we live, right? And also, we're not completely malleable. We're victims of the computation constraints of our own embodiments in societies. So we can't go everywhere, but we can probably go in more places earlier on. And then now it's super hard to become something else in engaging in play. But we have limits to that, and I don't think you're right. There's no privileged directionality in our theory. We are sort of agnostic for now. There might be some, right, in which it's always easier to go from this to this. I haven't identified a single one that satisfies me for now. That's maybe a separate question. I see that there are many hands. I don't know. Yeah,
can I? Yeah. Sorry, I don't see So, no, I just wanted to have a bit of pedagogical clarification. So, do we have this, or maybe I missed it, like bracketing without immersion, immersion without bracketing, without no bracketing, no immersion, like the little 4 cases table? What would be an example of each? That's kind of like something I would like to see. And then I was thinking if you have come up with the minimal agential structure that enables play in the world. Because I was thinking, what could be the immersion and bracketing of a stone in the universe, or like of like the Big Bang first element? Was it able to play, or was it completely immersed in the physics laws? So then you have to kind of the first bracketing you have to make is with respect to the kind of physics order back to the embodiment. So then I kind of got stuck in this, and then I thought, oh, maybe bracketing comes before immersion in evolution, and then, or maybe the other way around, and then these two things combine, or the two things emerge together. So I was like willing to see that the simple case like this yes, this no, this no, this no, this yes, no, yes, no, no, yes.
Yeah.
And then they have minimal structure. That's all. Sorry.
We have a bunch of examples, but we don't have structure.
Because then sorry, the last thing is the third point. Why is it different play from like arguing? Like if you get in an argument with someone about whether evolution is their ultimate concept or not, we will get immersed into this energy of like, these are the rules, this is the semantics I want to defend, and the other person has the other semantics. And that's, I mean, it's not as positive as playing chess or game, but so then are we reconsidering the very notion of what playing is? If we're going to let in this like non-positive, but maybe even kind of like language games, or like so what's the limit of play in that sense? So these are the 3 topics. Table, minimal structure, and then why not fighting is also a game. This set one. If I'm bracketing and immersing,
Maybe this is not the last one. I think there's a distinction between sophists and philosophers. Sophists are those people who engage in arguments just for the sake of arguing. They're not really interested in truth. And often they were getting money. It was like a performance, right? They're very, very, really good performers. So they'll get engaged in arguments. But at the end of the day, they don't really care if they get to the truth. As long as they're good performers, they get the money. This is very different from philosophers who are, so I would say that sophists are not engaged in play as such. They're engaged in a game called arguments, but they're not engaged in the play in the sense of this kind of, in the sense that we define in terms of this, just engaging this dynamic movement. Philosophers are the ones who are interested in truth. So they have this goal, right? But in order to reach this goal, they don't care if they win or not, right? So it's not about winning. I want to win against you. I want to win over my argument against you. It's more about letting the kind of dialogue unfold so that we reach truth. So in a sense, if we stick with this notion of play as kind of movement, then I think philosophers are the one playing. They're letting truth play itself out, you say, and the sophists are not really doing that. I think that's one way of putting it. Also, when you're fighting, you're not really playing because you are. Sometimes you get so kind of you care too much about winning. Right? You want to win, and then that becomes your goal, and then you're not really enjoying. So I think that's similar to the problem of the addiction that we mentioned. You get too attached, too immersed. You forget that this is a game, actually. So then you don't have this ability to zoom out, to go out, and that's a problem because just kind of all you care about is winning, and then there's not that the playful aspect is not there.
But then maybe fighting with a kind of diplomatic or like attitude which you care about, like the philosopher, just fight, philosophical fight, then would be a play. Like we argue again, we have different positions, we argue for the sake of finding truth. Yeah. And that would be played in the theory. So okay. So you need, the agents need to have an attitude then, maybe. So what's the minimal structure for that? Having right? So do cells play?
I think it's to do with the sense of this kind of awareness that it is play.
Yeah.
And in order to have this awareness that this is play, you actually have to be detached from it. Like you have to have an understanding that this is play as opposed to this other thing, right? That requires a bit of detachment.
But then you can touch this little limit, which is the limit.
Yeah.
It depends on the agent what is playing. Maybe for me, science is play, and for it's very hard work. And for the person who is enlightened, everything is play. Yeah. So it's also agent dependent.
So it's I think exactly. I was going to raise exactly that point. A lot of what you ask, well, the two first questions at least, maybe third, are about really agency and what is a self.
Yeah.
And if you accept that a self can be a decision maker, then you have a different answer from, you can have a bang model, you can have a decision maker that is a stone because its shape will make it roll down the hill in a different way. And sure, it will engage in play when you put it not on the mountain, but you put it on water. And that's another game we're playing here. But that's where does the metaphor break down, right? So I understand it, but I like the minimal kind of
because assuming that it's a decision maker, it's a huge gap. It's like a big assumption already that something
in the AI simulation. Then the simulations we have, it's a very simple agent, right? And we just manufacture any kind of rules it's going to engage in. And I think this is already a good model of what you would be in a different thing. But I'd say to address, I think that's the way more interesting, right? Like I think the metaphor is this kind of study of no self, or maybe we perspective, we intentionality kind of things, or group behavior, right? Or coarse-grained selves. Maybe you can switch between them, and that's something we're not very used to, or it might not even be possible for us. Things like that. People argue different things. I would say that gives you different answers to your questions. Sorry.
Yeah, just a small remark, because this is, of course, a discussion that we cannot discuss completely here now. But I think that you should nevertheless say that you are talking about play in a certain context. The context that you addressed after the last questions, that you already suppose some self-conscious note to be presence, etc. So this keeps open the possibility that other forms of play and other relations to playing from the being that plays are possible. I would not take pure passive agency as agency like the stone, but I can imagine that cells in a certain sense play. I mean, clearly consciousness is not necessarily implied. So I think you should distinguish this a little bit. And it also addresses this idea that there is a kind of romanticism in this whole discourse, because there is this feeling of the lost self, the child in its pure state that then gets somehow more and more boxed in and then discovers that it can break out again by using play and getting. I have nothing against it, and I think it's to some extent true, but there is something of a longing in there. So that's also interesting to recognize, I think.
So to me, if anything, it's frustrating that we start with the cubs and animal play, and we think we're going to address it, but as soon as we model it becomes much darker. We captured in our nets like so many things, and it's hard to get rid of them now. So play is such a large question, but more than we thought it would be.
But that's because play is not just the matter. Aspects that can be modeled.
Sorry, and this is play as we define as we go.
Okay,
right? So the simplification of play, not the general concept. That's even larger than anything. But even when we try to limit it to so just this definition or this subset of properties, we still get a lot, right? And it's hard to do. Is there anything on, by the way, just making sure that people are...
Yeah, but they are not raising their hand. They can. I just wanted to say that in your... sorry.
You're organizing this. You should.
I should shut up. Okay.
You should be able to ask many questions.
Because you are saying that you are to my mind, I may be hallucinating, but to my mind, what you are modeling is totally applicable to those cubes and those animals, except for this bloody question of evolutionary function, which kind of gets in, yes, because if you just think about the bracketing and this immersion. The way I hear you, yes, and I can be adding all sorts of things that you are not saying and correct me, but for me it's more like a metaphysical framework, when you are speaking about enlightenment and so on. So it's much more it makes much more sense if you approach reality as a cognitive kind of like a distributed cognition type of, or panpsychic or whatever, so you have reality as a network of cognitive processes, yes, which actually and then if you take reality as network of denser or more distributed or more simpler or more condensed cognitive processing, then what existence of more advanced cognitive agents would be bracketing within this whole network, yes, which and that would render all intelligent beings as playthings of reality, yes. But in that sense, if because this is this network, kind of bracketing itself and immersing, kind of playing this individual for a time being, yes. And then what would a play being played by this individual be? Would be a kind of nested architecture, that the same happens within this entity and within this game. And when we get to do that, we play the game of reality basically within this structure. Yeah. So evolutionary explanation would not be functional for survival, but more this adjacent possible for reality itself, that is becomes complex enough that it can replicate its own move again within the structure, if it makes any sense. Or maybe it doesn't, I'm fine with that. just say what I'm hearing.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Please raise your hand in case you.
No, we don't have anybody.
Yeah. The jump to the meta is a very difficult thing. So I don't think we're attempting to jump to metaphysics.
Okay.
Or if we did so, we did it by accident.
Okay.
It's inevitable. What happens within the evolutionary framework, for example, to give something concrete, is that you do jump to meta or second order evolutionary selection by shielding yourself from different pressures, right? You can. And then there are things like evolvability. You have this in language where you have sentences or grammatical structures that are selected for because they are more likely to produce in the future. It's a sort of almost a sort of prediction, evolutionary prediction, right? In which you're producing structures that are more likely to produce something that will evolve eventually to something correct. And it's because the whole lineage is being selected together. It's also actually that's called lineage selection, which is a good framing of evolvability. And it's meta, but it's not really meta out of it. It's just meta emergent from those layers of reality, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Someone said something.
Would anybody from the Zoom room like to say or comment or ask anything? Orion, yeah.
I had an insight, but like with insights, it's kind of like a flash. It's kind of gone here on gone the next. But maybe you can help me reconstruct it. I'm curious why. I would like to know why. Like all these diagrams put something in common. You know, like with this. So with this, with this kind of moving in and moving out, it's like moving in is moving out, right? Like moving into something is moving out of something else. And moving out of something is moving into something else. Like in a sense, it's about the shifting of attention and our capacity to shift attention and the fact that attention is always a relationship. And I'm also interested why this moving in and moving out diagram is in some sense the same diagram as the most simple diagram of an agent. Like even though the labels are shifted a little bit, one's moving in and moving out of the world, and one is moving out into the world and the world moving into you. And why this diagram of different worlds, possible play worlds within the world, is the same diagram as a I don't know, like like a system within a system, like cells, like molecules within a cell wall. Like there's something playful about it, and there's something that this motif keeps repeating over and over and over again, no? And that yeah, it's almost like it's this shifting of attention and this capacity to shift attention. Attention as being a relationship, and that thing being at once, like you say, like our meta capacity to play, like our engaging with play in a playful way. And the very notion of being in, like the very essence of being somehow of like even what actually maybe what cybernetics is when you admit the virtual to it, right? Like when you admit that there's all these virtual worlds also within ourselves. That's not really a question, but maybe you can help me.
Can you please ask?
It's a game.
It's a game.
It's painful. It's
This thing gives an answer for you.
yeah.
No, I like it. The universal virtuality picture. I don't dislike anything about it. It's again very Don Hoffmanian, if anything, in the sense that nothing is reality, and we're just switching between our senses and cells between with literally. So when I said change of variables, what did you feel about this picture? Right, it's because I meant it very literally. Can we find changes variable that translates us into, and it's often variables are often senses, where you go into this virtual reality with if it's games or whatever it is, you substitute things that are in yourselves into this game thing. It could be something else like meditation or hypnosis, where you play. Often you get into induction into hypnosis by a game of pretend, which is one type of induction, or similar practices in imaging or visualizing in meditation practices. Those are similar, right? In that same way, mapping onto this other space of being a self, being a distributed self, whatever floats your boat, if it's possible. That there should be a mapping to it.
I wanted to move, try a little bit to another kind of interesting aspect that it would be great that you elaborate a bit on, which is like the technological way to immerse and bracket. Because I was thinking when you spoke about the virtual reality, the Oculus things, that induce an immersion, but by manipulating the senses. So it's like technology for immersion. You feel gravity, you feel like they change the rules of the game, and of course, all the these drug experiences that you also get into new rule systems, which are not so more pharmacological than technological, maybe, and yeah. So there is a lot of, maybe from a philosophical perspective, a lot to say about this way to physically induce these processes rather than like. And what role would play that for meditation, which is like a technique to induce a change in your own physiology, but so all that. What can you say about something that makes sense?
Yeah. So the question is, can we have a technology for bracketing? The distancing, which is interesting. But I mean, we have certain drugs that we can take. You can get a sense of no self by taking some drugs. The problem, though, with those is that when you come back, right, you're a bit lost. Why? Because you didn't go through that practice. I think the importance of going through the practice of bracketing is that you understand what's going on. When you bracket, you are not just taking a distance, but you are saying that, okay, this is.
So you hold the brackets. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You want to take a distance to it, and you're saying, okay, this makes sense, but within this realm, right? And you're taking a distance from that explicitly and intentionally. When you take drugs, it kind of happens just like that. So when you come back, you don't really know what's real, and you're kind of lost. Okay, like, was that reality? Is this reality? And you don't have grounding. And I think that's the challenge of bracketing, is that, as you were saying, like, it requires grounding those values in the other sphere, wherever that sphere is that you come back to. But it requires that kind of grounding, and that's why I think in these wisdom traditions, it is a practice that requires a lot of discipline and lots of years of training, because it's not something easy just like that. So when we're talking about technology, I think that's very interesting. Thing to think about. Immersion is very easy to do, perhaps. Much more than
the problem is that, again, the relation between the body and the mind comes into play, because immersion in the technological sense is very strong and very suggestive, but it has nothing to do with our normal feeling of presence. I mean, I go to the Klimt 3D immersive exposition in Brussels, and it's fantastic, and I can walk through the paintings because I'm there like a ghost. I'm not really there, if you want, in the sense that my normal experience of being present is not the same. So inducing it, yes, to some extent, but is it still the same experience?
For instance, it's hard to simulate, and we have some people across labs working on exactly on that. We made, so technology could mean just practices. I don't differentiate.
Yes, okay.
Between
but that's important to say.
But we do build tools, some different things you can layer that bring you there more, and we study that. I think Clémence has something, and Francis. All right, you fight it out.
I'll take my privilege of being the director or something.
Set things straight.
I think we are getting to a very important point. The technology for bracketing the immersion technologies exist. All the virtual reality, all the game mechanics, all the things that create a flow. We know the techniques, gamification, etc. That exists. The techniques for bracketing, wisdom traditions like Zen Buddhism, like meditation, and so on, give you a number of methods, but they are not at all as easy as going to play a computer game. So it is worth thinking about those. And I wanted to make a more general remark. I think that you hit the nail on the head with the exploration trade-off. That is indeed what I meant with the evolutionary function. The evolutionary function is when you don't need to exploit, it's good to explore, because by exploring, you create opportunities that you don't know beforehand that may be much better than whatever you are exploiting. If you're in a building and there is a fire, you need to get out of the building as quickly as possible. You are immersed in the problem. You don't have the time to explore the building. On the other hand, if you enter a building where you've never been, it's good to explore and just see what's there in that building. So it is that aspect that play for me, I see play mostly in the exploration part. So there are these kind of games where you really immerse yourself completely and have strict rules. But I think that the main function of play is still the bracketing, I think. I have a playful attitude. I just try out things, and if it doesn't work, doesn't matter. I'll try out something else, and that's the way that children play. Children may have rules, but if they don't like the rules, they change the rules, and it's not a big bother if one of the children transgresses the rules. The others will just say, "Mind him." No. That doll is steady. It's not Annie. That's the rules are not that important. So because we have these immersion technologies like computer games nowadays, we are much more tending to think of games in this immersion aspect, but I think the bracketing part is most important. And I wanted to make a last remark, that is the psychology of it. There's one theory that I very much like, the broaden and build theory of positive emotions of Barbara Fredrickson. And it's a theory that explains why do we have positive emotions. Negative emotions is kind of obvious. If there is a danger, you need to be frightened so that you run away. If there is something that may be poisonous, you need to be disgusted and spit it out. If there is somebody who attacks you, you need to get angry, you need to fight them. But why do we have positive emotions? In her view, what the positive emotions do is they open up your mind to this kind of playfulness. I don't remember whether she uses the term playfulness, but what she means by broaden and build is it broadens your field of attention so that you become open to all kinds of things that otherwise you might not have noticed. You become aware of the wind and of the perfume of a flower and of a flower that's there and of a child that's playing. You become aware of lots of things that otherwise, if you're in exploitation mode, that means the mode where you have a problem to solve, that you wouldn't pay attention to. So this opening up, it is a natural side effect according to this theory of positive emotion. And what is a positive emotion? A positive emotion is that you are happy with the way things are, so you don't have any problems to solve. There is no goal, there isn't anything you need to do, so you can just enjoy, relax, look around, play. So that's the role of positive emotions, precisely to create this situation which bracketing becomes easier. And I think that what enlightenment also is in the Zen Buddhist sense is that ideally you get in this mode where you can always be in that mode. Like if you have a problem to solve, you do it, but you can pop out of it at any moment and say, well, actually, I'll forget about the problem. I'll just enjoy that butterfly that's playing on the flower there.
Openness is another key word.
In a way, there are two things that you could dive into this simulated virtual reality and have the illusion that there is no goal, but of course there are goals. They're just very different from where you came from. So maybe once you jump into it, there is a sort of motion sickness notions of switching realities. Is that maybe you're confused. What I like the most about you made several points. I love the notice that there is no technology that brackets. There are some, but they're very old, and recently there is very little being done in that space. And I haven't formulated it that way, although I think you had this intuition in some of your parts. Isn't that weird? Because in wisdom traditions or practices like hypnosis, different things like that, it's very easy to crack it. It's very hard to create positive illusion, which is the technical term for seeing hallucinations and things like that. Actually, are harder to make happen. They can be naturally made, but they're hard to control. Whereas the bracketing is something that you are given the tools earlier in the learning this. And I find that very reversed in technology somehow, in terms of what we have in video games and so on. It's sort of very surprising. Why is that?
Well, there can be simple commercial reasons. If you want to sell something, you want the people to get immersed in your technology so that they get addicted to it and use it as much as possible and want to be in it and not want to be in somebody else's game.
But I think there's reflection is hard to sell.
Yeah, it's hard to sell opening up people's minds because by definition they're not interested only in you. They're interested in everything.
You don't want to create free agents that would buy any product they want. You want to control them. That's absolutely right.
A question.
It's useful, but it's useful to notice that again, I think that immersion in one thing is bracketing is something else, right? So even if like a space wants to immerse you in space, one way of doing that is by bracketing you from the rest of the world, right? So how platforms, for example, like Facebook will try to keep the links within Facebook. So it's, I think bracketing and immersion are somehow two sides of the same coin. Even in the past, you say like hallucinations are hard to generate, but like I don't know, you get involved in immersed in other kinds of collective, not necessarily the level of the mind, right? Like it might be a collective phenomenon that you get immersed in, like a game or a fight or a war or an exploration of some kind.
But yes.
I mean, I don't agree with this idea that necessarily going into one, immersed in one world means getting out of another one, because there is still a difference between being immersed in anything and being bracketing in open. That's the exploitation, exploration, that's the enlightenment versus the obsession. It's not just a question of going from one game to another game. You can be fully in a game immersed, or you can have this playful attitude, and I call it that, yeah, I'm open to anything.
But I
it's a bit like playing improvised music, which is the game that you can play as an individual, but also as a group, as a community. You can do either of them. And it's interesting because there it is being immersed and open at the same time, very much. Because nothing of what you're going to do is already determined in advance. It really originates at the moment. It can originate in interaction with the other musicians around you, so you have to have all this openness. But at the same time, you could do this, and there are people who do this also on yourself. So I tend to agree that the distinction that you make is a bit too, somehow a little bit artificial at some points. What you mean by immersion is not completely clear to me, but the aspect of game and openness, the connection between being immersed in a game and being open at the same time, I think there were examples in reality that point in the direction that this is real. Yeah.
Well, I don't say that they exclude each other, but they are 2 points of a continuum. If you are more on the one, you are less on the other. So it's not just that bracketing means moving from one immersed game to another immersed game. I don't think that is what is. That's not enlightenment. Enlightenment is precisely you don't have to play any game. Everything is
So we
one
are,
big play.
we are all enlightened here, we know all
Oh,
what
yeah.
this means.
Okay, but I wonder about this, like this part of the conversation when we speak about immersive technologies, and you say that there is much more immersion and much less bracketing. When I think about like a VR game, to me it's like mostly bracketing rather than immersion. Because first of all, like if I accept the rules of the game, kind of, if I'm expected to shoot at the guys with red hats, I normally don't do that. So I immediately become a different entity, and this is bracketing because, but it's bracketing because it's creating a different me caring about shooting at red guys. Doesn't normally happen to me. Yeah?
Moving out of one game into another game, you can say yes, it's bracketing because you're moving out, but if you immediately afterwards came in another game, it's the immersion that's the most important thing. The bracketing really is the way children play, and children play, they don't have these strict rules, they change the rules while they are playing. They are much freer than any kind of a virtual reality.
Okay, so it's a question about the terminology. And like, if I accept the rules of like wanting and caring about shooting red guys, is it bracketing or immersion for you?
Yeah, there are two. I mean, I agree that it's two sides of the same coin. But the reason why we explicitly kind of separated them is because I think you can, for one thing, conceptually they are two different things. But you can make each a practice, right? You can focus on them separately. And when people talk about play, people tend to focus on the immersive aspect, but you have implicitly bracketing. You are implicitly bracketing, but you can make that an explicit act. And then you can really practice on doing that to yourself to certain on various levels, and then that can really become a kind of meditative practice.
Because I have accepted the value system and whatnot. Yes, in entering such a game, I accept the value system, value measurement. Affordability, affordances that I accept I have, and I exclude others that normally I do, and so on. Yes.
You keep coming back to the word practice, and I'm very curious. Like, what are the practices that you have in mind, and so what are the practices from maybe from Zen Buddhism that bring one towards this playful samadhi, and is it that play itself can be the practice?
I think so, yeah. But it can be different kinds of practices. I think engaging in interdisciplinary research is a kind of practice, because that's exactly what you're doing. You have to kind of go in, but you also have to go out, right? And you have to be able to translate between different fields. That's a big practice. Like some people are really good at that. Some people are not. If you're just stuck in one discipline, you can't communicate with other people, right? That's a practice too. So I think different kinds of practices exist. Depends on, but I think ultimately it might lead to the same thing. But I think, I don't know.
I haven't worked this out quite yet. I think it's a very important question to work on. When you have two levels of description of the same system, and you may play their own game in each of them, and they have their own rules of selection. They still are the same system, and when you switch to the other level, there is a transfer of information, right? It's usually a bottleneck compared to all the information transfer within. So I should take an example. So within cell level, you have lots of information being transferred from cell to cell. But when you look at the tissue, tissues themselves have their own processes. But the information transfer between layers are more bottleneck than that. And I feel like there's a contact between that and what we're talking about here. And I don't think it's super obvious. Or at least maybe I missed it. I think that is still a promising view of trying to extract. You try to extract this information to what you have learned at cell level. There may be self-similar events, right, that are universal in physics that exist at different levels of description, right? So there's levels of organization, you might say. But apart from this similarity, there is something that you need to port from one to the other, and maybe that's what we're trying to do, right? You playing. This would be an example of this play. You engage here, and then you go back. Can you really talk to cells in a significant way without working on this mapping very actively? They don't mean love in the same way you mean love or whatever. Yeah, just making something up. Does that make sense? It's sort of bringing things back to your own way. It's not trivial.
Yeah, on this, it was actually leads a bit to the question I had in mind. More an open question. It's about how to change plays, to change games. Like, what would be the recommendations to do it softly, to avoid addiction, or to and I think it's going to be a question that becomes more and more relevant if VR and augmented reality take off, because we'll have all this kind of game that we can play in different ways, and maybe there are ways that are much healthier psychologically than just clicking the exit button of your game and get off your headset and totally in the real world again, which is a totally different world. Maybe there should be a kind of cognitive cool down of 5-10 minutes, and where you gradually come down to, and could be the same also warming up to go gradually into the virtual world, and so that transitions could be stopped.
No, that's why I was asking about the technology aspect, because I have played around with these things, and it's really, I felt, and everybody feel completely out of control in this part of the process. Then you play the game and you do everything, but there is this kind of like, wow, this is something. And there is a lot of potential for education. So it looks like a nice application of this very courageous effort that you are doing.
Yeah, there is for education, it's a very important point. I feel like part of this you addressed already in your book. Yeah, sounds like in the better.
Okay.
That's what. You want to say a word about this? You just published this, no?
It's coming out in January.
Okay.
Basically, I'm using this idea of bracketing and suggesting that as a tool to play with reality. Yeah, it's basically this idea. But,
I mean, the part of playing ads. I feel like that helps immediately with these kind of problems or education.
Well, I can mention what I do in my class. This is related. I don't know. Is that right?
Just pointing at stuff you don't have to. You don't have to.
The book is about bracketing and using the tool to play with reality. So playing with reality is kind of idea, like nurturing the sense of openness. The sense of openness, playfulness, which gives you a sense of freedom to explore further, and so it's a kind of practical guide.
That's very important. Can you send me a copy?
It's called the book is about bracketing and using that in practice, as a way of life. And I provide various exercises on how to do this.
Very, very important.
Yeah, on a side note, this is one of, like, we could say, like, the product of a comparative studies philosophy, right?
Yeah.
So how do you see that thing going on in the world? Because now there is a sort of capitalistic crisis, and like many people are trying to look on other philosophical traditions to seek for answers. So how do you see that? Because you are in the field. I just have heard of it.
It's a good trend. Moving away from this kind of Eurocentric view of philosophy. And what I do in the book is I freely use ideas from phenomenology and Japanese philosophies and Buddhism, putting them on equal footing because they're all equally interesting and they have all interesting things to say. The wisdom traditions, the difficulty is that it has this practice component, which is not just about using the mind, right? But using your body as well as a practice. You have to sit and do it. It requires commitment. That's why it's the hurdle is a bit higher than kind of philosophy in the sense of just kind of reading books and kind of thing.
Easy to write books and to read books and to make all
combinatoric.
The very obscure words and sound very deep, but actually the very strange understanding of reality.
It's not so easy to write books.
Even such books. It will be time slowly to wrap up.
Yeah, it's not really a question, but how do you, when you're doing this kind of comparative philosophy, how do you guide yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it comes back to my upbringing. I'm Japanese, but I was brought up in the States. And I always kind of struggled with finding my self-identity. Who am I was always a question for me. But ultimately, I have kind of found that I'm now content with the fact that I don't have a certain identity, precisely because I feel like I can play differently. Right? When I'm speaking English, this is one identity I have. When I speak Japanese, I'm completely different, and I recognize that, and I have fun doing that. Before, I struggled. I was like, oh, I feel a bit uncomfortable. But then, like, the question is, which one is my real me? There's no real me. It's all a play.
We have the image.
When I'm not always in this state, I do struggle. But having this kind of sense of self has helped me navigate through life, and that's the way I approach philosophy as well. These different traditions are all close to me because it resonates with my own experience, and there is a kind of Western side to me as well, but there's also more of an Eastern side. And yeah, they're kind of, if they have something to offer to me, that's great. And my job is for me to translate all these ideas to people who don't have a specific background in philosophy, because it's useful information. And if I can translate it and to kind of package it in a way that speaks to people, then that's great. So my book, I'm not speaking to professional philosophers because they're not going to care. I'm speaking to students who are interested in really kind of exploring reality.
Amazing. I think everybody wants this book now. It's good. It's going good. It will be time to wrap up, I suppose. Yes, and move it to the bar, or unless.
Amazing discussion here. Amazing questions. I recorded part of it, and I think we'll look at this and we'll rehab. And if something comes to mind, would be amazing to shoot us an email. Easily searchable.
Would it be possible to share your slides as a kind of and also maybe then the emails are there, so it's more easy to communicate.
Okay. So thank you so much. Yuko, Olaf. Thank you. Yeah.